Hi, this is McLaughlin. This is week 10 of my course. This is my reflective of week 10. It'll be covering, one second, sorry, I always forget to do this. It'll be covering Wednesday the 4th to Friday the 6th. Some of this worked on over the weekend, so let's say to the 8th. This week's going to work a bit weirdly because as talked about last week while I was filming, I got it all filmed and this week was editing. And the way I edit, I think I've explained this in different videos and stuff like that, is I basically edit multiple things at once, stuff like that. So it gets kind of complicated. What days I done things, stuff like that. Just a spoiler for the end of this, I edited the whole film. And that was 7 segments. As you can see from how I broke it down as the footage, I broke it down into 7 sections, each kind of done by the song. So Mr. Blue Sky, Mr. Lonely, No Earth Love, Music Argument, Wes Anderson, We're Gonna Die, and Are You Happy? And I edited them individually. I put together a rough cut because I've got 2 weeks to edit this week and next week. I put together a rough cut this week that doesn't. The biggest difference between a rough cut and the final one that I'll make on Friday, I will put together finally on Friday, is that it doesn't have the VFX shot from Mr. Blue Sky sequences, and not the whole thing's not really final, but it's kind of a rough cut. So how I'm going to work this week is, usually I do Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, or whatever. This week I'm just going to go down each section and kind of talk about what any problems and any issues I had with it and stuff like that. Also, I won't be doing much editing for this because normally what I'll do is I'll edit in segments of like, oh, this was Monday, this was Tuesday, whatever. But I thought if it's 7 segments and some are pretty small, it's going to get very annoying if you keep going back and forth. So I'm going to use timestamps on YouTube to break it up instead of normal segments. So let's get into the first one. I will put the near folder. The first sequence was the Mr. Blue Sky sequence. So just a little bit about how I've done these sequences before I go into problem solving. I put them all into bins. This helped organize it. So for example, Mr. Blue Sky, all the audio is in a bin. It just makes it easier to find it and stuff like that. And then anything that's used outside, like used kind of outside of it. So this, all of this stuff is actually for a trailer I made that used, basically just used footage from the film. I copy and pasted it. And this is the trailer. This is kind of a side project I've done just because I got a bit bored and I wanted something a bit more creative. So I timed it out to music and I used clips across it. So that's a trailer I've done. So that's stuff's in the trailer. But for example, the title sequence is kind of separate from everything, so it's in here. But basically, I broke it down into folders. This makes it much easier to organize footage. And then further on, the Mr. Blue Sky sequence is done in by time. So, for example, 1 corresponding to 1. This kind of helps just organize it a bit and just kind of makes it easier to kind of lay out and stuff like that. So how I've done the editing for Mr. Blue Sky sequence, and this kind of goes into the problem solving, is the timing and stuff like that, is that I listened to the music and I timed it out. The problem was that I made a music cue plan, I talked about planning. That was basically the idea was it was a timestamp thing and stuff like that. To tell me how long it got and stuff like that. It turns out the footage was a bit off to the music cue plan. So instead of the problem was that the music cue plan, basically the footage didn't work well with the music cue plan. And if I stuck to the music cue plan, it would have, the footage looked off and everything was been terrible. So basically I kind of use a music plan that's more of a guide than a strict kind of rule. And I kind of work with the footage and the music plan together. So some sequences are slightly longer, got a longer to music plan, stuff like that. It does stick pretty well to the music plan. Further on, it does kind of come off a bit, but not that much. Also, how I put together this sequence is through adjustment layers. So these adjustments layers basically create the crop, like the color grade, the crop, stuff like that. So you can see there's without the adjustment layer, there it is with the adjustment layer. So it adds this aspect ratio, it adds the gamma color grade, it really does adds to it. So another from my hand, and it's connected to Mr. Blue Sky sequence. As I talked about in the intro, the Mr. Blue Sky sequence is meant to have VFX shots. So I'll go to where it would be. So here there would be sound waves coming on from the person's hand. time to the music. The reason why I didn't do the VFX shots yet is because After Effects at the time I was working on this actually was being a bit buggy and not really working that well. So I basically decided to basically edit the whole film together, and then I'll do the effects later next week. And the plan with this is that I'm simply going to export just the Mr. Blue Sky sequence and then edit in After Effects, just so that I do export much and it's not too much for in After Effects. I've tested it out now and it works fine at home, so I can kind of work on it at home. And if it doesn't work in the college, I've got backup options. I know it will work at home. Absolute worst case scenario, if I cannot get After Effects to work, I can fall back on the Premiere option that I did talk about my experimentation. That wasn't as good, but if nothing else works, I'd rather have it in there, you know? So yeah, that was kind of the Mr. Blue Sky sequence. This was a pretty easy sequence to do, to be honest. The biggest problem was just that timing to music and stuff like that, and the lip syncing was really difficult. So like bits like this, when it's lip syncing, was really difficult because it's timing out and stuff like that. But other than that, I really have many problems with it. Next up is the Mr. Lonely sequence. Mr. Lonely sequence had similar issues. It didn't have as many issues in Mr. Blue Sky sequence, because Mr. Lonely sequence is more about the kind of characters, like more about the characters' feelings and emotions and stuff like that than the actual kind of timing to music. So the song meant to be pretty exciting. The song doesn't have to be timed up as well. But I did have a couple of issues. One of the ones is key here. So this bit. So you might notice the character turns. So it turns into this shot so I can go into Mr. Suicide. When I was writing the script and when I was planning it, I forgot one little detail and why the character turns. I think in the script I mentioned that he turns because he hears a sound, but I didn't really plan out the sound. So I kind of had to do some kind of more creative thinking and stuff like that. So I added in this kind of buzzing sound. So this is actually, if you go way forward into the plot, in the Wes Anderson sequence, this buzzing sound can be heard again. And the idea of the buzzing sound is this is world kind of glitching apart. So as you can see, the world glitches apart, it makes this same sound. So I kind of took influence of that and thought, how can we kind of sync this up and stuff like that? So I used that small little bit of sound, a sound effect, basically, I justify the turning. So that's kind of a quick problem solving, is adding that glitching in sound and also connected to the Wes Anderson sequence. So it just feels a bit more kind of, it makes the character make more sense, and it kind of makes the plot narrative feel a bit less contrived and stuff like that. There wasn't really any other issues with the Mr. Blue Sky sequence, because this is actually a very short sequence. It uses a very simple color grade and stuff like that. I did find that this shot, for example, lingered on a bit too long in the filming and stuff like that, and in my actual planning, just because I think when you, the saying that says that the film is made in 3 parts: the planning, the filming, and the editing. And I felt like when I was filming it, so I didn't really think about how long it's going to take. But once I got into the editing, I started watching it and looking at my planning, I thought it was a bit longer. So I decided to cut it down a tiny bit, and you can kind of see it from here. Is it kind of, I felt like it just went on for too long, so I kind of cut that, trimmed that down. But again, a very simple sequence. I have very little issues with it. Next up is the kind of the most edit heavy sequence, and this was the Nowhere to Run dream sequence. The Nowhere to Run sequence was the kind of least planned out, I would say, because a lot of them are very exactly the plan, but I want a lot of creative freedom in this section. It's meant to be very weird and visual and kind of very much, you know, allow me to test out and mess around with things. But a couple of things I did have is, for example, this opening bit where it's running through different foot movement. Originally, this was much longer in the music plan when I filmed it, stuff like that. But once I got the editing, actually watched it, I felt it get really boring, even with the effects. And this is meant to be a very high energy scene, so I basically cut it in half. And how I changed it was basically, as you can see in the edit, instead of cutting off the music, basically what I done was I used this that basically, I forgot what it's called, but basically a constant gain, so it makes it rise in, so it feels less blunt, because it's not sight from the beginning, it feels less blunt, stuff like that. And I had to cut it here when it goes into the voice directly talking, and it is a little bit buggy, but I kind of like that aspect because it plays in that surrealism and very glitchy kind of world I'm going for in the sequence. So I think it works out well. Another thing I had was the end of the sequence, if I just go all the way to the end. this shot. This shot was meant to last a tiny bit longer, and it didn't really. The shots, as you can see, don't match up that well with the position, stuff like that, compared to other sequences. So the solution I came around it was very kind of quickly cutting it and stuff like that. So it's very faster. This again in the planning, this is much longer, but I thought just cut it faster. It works better, and it kind of it's more instant, stuff like that, and it really kind of plays into that narrative and helps kind of work around it. But again, no one sequence was probably the most fun to do, I'll be honest. It's my favorite creative freedom. As you can see, I've done this here. I use this is basically done through multiple layers, opacity, and I decrease in speed and stuff like that. And I think it really works as a sequence, and it's very interesting to do. Next up is music argument. Music argument was the most challenging one because every other sequence works with one song. This works with two. The point of music argument I talked about in my planning, but basically character fighting between two worlds. As you can see, we've got the Creep song that's all black and white, and we've got Break My Stride that is this very complicated color grade. Let's go into this. This is actually multiple color grade, multiple things on top of each other, blurringness, stuff like that. I used a tutorial that I talked about in my planning and my experimentation to in my color grading segment from the planning that I talked about. This is more complicated. It adds a bunch of effects for that. I think it coded out really well. It goes for a very weird look, whereas every other segment is kind of very much a color grade. The biggest problem I had with this sequence was timing out the music to feel naturally more into each other, because I wanted them to be very distinct. But the problem I have was when I first had it in with the Creep, it's a very slow and quiet song, whereas Break My Stride is obviously a much louder song. And when it went to Breaking My Stride, it kind of felt too jolty and too much. So basically, how I fixed it was lowering Break My Stride by about 10 decibels, and it felt much more in line with the Creep, but without being kind of too much like it. So here you go. As you can see, the same kind of volume, they feel very synced together, but they feel very unique, and I think that helps in the music argument. Another issue I had was the last bit, the audio. You might notice, so the audio wasn't matching up. So for this bit where the character kind of moves out, rips out their arm, and then goes into this world, this had two separate bits of audio, natural audio, that I recorded through the through the camera, because it was meant to have it's meant to be a kind of very natural kind of go from the music world to the real world. The problem was because these are filmed at two different points, the audio actually sounds weird, because you see here different sounds cut off at the beginning and not anymore. But the way I kind of worked around this, and the solution I framed for this problem was I basically this segment here is actually longer. I cut it down. That meant that this audio was much longer. So basically what I could done, and because I didn't really, him just standing there was much longer. So no other sounds I heard. I basically just stretched the audio to cover both footages. And it can sound, if you listen to it, you don't even hear the chain. You don't even hear it sounds very much natural. And I think that helps play into the shot and really trick people's brains into thinking that these come after one each other, and it's more cinematic. So yeah, music argument, some challenges. Music argument, the challenge was basically how do you sync up two pieces of music, whereas something like No to One was the challenge of editing and more lighting and stuff like that. Next up is Wes Anderson. Wes Anderson had one of the bigger issues. If you may remember back in the planning, this shot was meant to be this shot and then basically a bigger shot with two hands tapping on the thing. It turned out recording, I don't know what happened, but this is the only thing that was affected. The only shot I forgot was this 2-1. I forgot. It's a very stressful day, and it's something I'll keep in mind when I further my career, is kind of have more of a checklist and go through the shots and make sure I get every shot. But I didn't get a shot as I didn't have time to kind of go back to it and film stuff like that. What the solution I came around is I do multiple takes for everything, because I think it's better to have multiple takes and stuff like this. And this is where it comes into play. Is so one take wouldn't cover the entire tapping. If I slow it down, if I messed around the speed, it wouldn't have worked. But I used basically this is 2 takes, and because it's kind of very similar takes and stuff like that, and the same shot, you don't really notice that it goes onto it. And I think it works. I think it works for what I'm doing, is kind of very that tapping and stuff like that. So the problem I had was, forgot to get both clips of it. The solution is kind of binding to the first and second takes together. Another issue I had was difficult to time up the music. This was, I mean, much more timed out and stuff like that, but I realized when I was editing it, the footage I shot wasn't the best timed out. So basically I kind of embraced this surrealism, and this was meant to be my dream sequence, like one of a music video style one. And I think it worked better that it's kind of more random shots and stuff like that put together than what I've planned for. And I think this plays into it. Like, for example, this shot here, it's like this shot, these don't really match up, and I think that was you know, like in the planning it was meant to match up more, but obviously when I filmed I kind of botched it. But I think it plays in that more dreamlike sequence, so it's reminds me more music video and stuff like that, and I think it helps do it. Another issue I had was the glitching. So I will bring up what happens. You see here the sequence goes and it glitches out of the world. The glitching was difficult. I couldn't find the right glitching what I wanted for, and I didn't want it to be very clear. I wanted it to be something unique, very not too cliched, but still have that glitching aspect of the red and blue. I really like this red and blue added in. Red and blue are obviously big colors in the film, obviously, because there was antagonist red, characters blue, you always wear blue, stuff like that. So the solution I came up with this was basically taking the time looking at a bunch of green screen glitch options. I think I looked at about 30. And I kind of tested around. I took it on the footage, saw what worked best. I found in the end this was the best footage that I could find. So yeah, I think it worked best. Overall, this sequence, I think it turned out pretty well. I don't really like the first bit, but I think once we get into this glitching, really brings it together. And I really do like this kind of, when it gets all glitchy and weird and how we glitch through different styles. I think that's really unique. I really like that aspect of it. I just think the first bit's not the best. So if I had time, I'll probably reshoot parts of that. So let's go into the "We're All Gonna Die" sequence. This is a pretty short sequence. As you can see from the timeline, this is much shorter than any other sequence and a lot more simpler. I did have a couple of issues. One of the issues I had was the voice. The original version was too haunting. So just to do a little recap on how I done the voice. The voice was done through audition mostly for the first kind of parts. Specifically, the Mr. Blue Sky sequence, the Mr. Lonely sequence, and any other time the voice apart from Nowhere to Run was used, it was much more through auditions. I used multiple effects and stuff like that to give it this kind of haunting, demonic kind of feel. For the Nowhere to Run sequence, I made it sound pretty normal just because it went to a dream sequence, kind of glitching radio-like. When it came to the We're Gonna Die sequence, it was much more haunting in the first time I done it because I used a kind of similar effects to Mr. Lonely sequence, but I felt for where we are in the narrative, it was meant to be pretty normal and sound pretty normal and kind of be more comforting. So basically the solution I came up with it was dialing back to the set effects and making it more simple. So I gave it like kind of how I done this was through a parametric equalizer that is on an old-time radio. I slightly messed around with that a bit to kind of give it a otherworldly feel, but kind of very more comforting and stuff like that. And I think it helped play into the narrative. You might notice on the color grading, if you look at my website, the color grading plan and this is slightly different. This is a bit more lighter and stuff like that. Because I found the problem with the color grading plan was I usually shot from outdoors because most of my film was shot outdoors. Here's the issue where that happens. This is an indoor sequence and its lighting was slightly more different, stuff like that. So it didn't work as well. So what I done was basically I messed around a bit more with effects and I dialed it down a tiny bit to kind of work better with the footage I had instead of just sticking correctly to the rules. And this is an example of I don't stick directly to the rules if it's not working. I kind of mess around the footage and come on to it. So finally, we're going into the "Are You Happy" sequence. This, in my personal opinion, is the best sequence of the film. I really do like how it came together. It's a very, it's kind of the heart of the movie, and it really kind of, I think it really works. So one of the issues I had was I found the kinetic typography kind of difficult. So I'll get to a shot that where it is. So this is an example of the kinetic typography. As you can see, types it appears across the screen. I found this kind of difficult for it and stuff like that. So how I kind of solution around it was looking back on the experimentation video I did on kinetic typography, looking back at how I done it and looking back at the sources I used in my process research report, the kind of reports, and basically took a step back and kind of messed around it a bit more. And I think this final effect actually does look pretty effective. It's a very simple effect, but I think it really highlights what I'm going for and this kind of writing effect. I think it really does work. So that's a good example of how I kind of took a step back and really understood the problem. Another issue I had was the color grading wasn't working on the flashback sequences. So as you can see, this sequence has a purple tint color grade because it's meant to embrace the character of red and blue, enemy and protagonist come together. But I felt on the raw footage it didn't really work. It felt weird just because these are different locations, stuff like that. Instead of tinging around and messing with each location, with each shot looking different, I decided to remove the color grade. And I think this creates more of a raw, kind of unfiltered look at the character's actual world. And I think it's more interesting. It's kind of more punchy and stuff like that. And I think it makes the people more reflect on the rest of the film. I think it really helps. Yeah, so I think it's a really good choice. You know, shots like this, where like the character, where you'd see all the graphics and stuff like that aren't there to show the character's delusion. And I think it really helped. It really shows how, even before the world was kind of very tainted because he had that slight color grade to the world. And I think it really helps further the message of the film. Another issue I had was location continuity. So this is way back at the end. So the footage is him going to the car and stuff like that. Originally, my car was actually around here when I shot this sequence because I forgot to shoot this intro, and the sequence involves me driving off. So I shot this bit driving off, and then shot the intro, and then shot a bit more of me standing next to the car. And the location continuity was basically off because I used multiple shots. So the car kept moving around, so that didn't really make any sense. So what I was lucky because I shot more footage I needed for this sequence was I basically used just this one scene instead of multiple scenes and cut it down more to make the continuity make sense. So overall, it kind of so the problem was location moving was making sense and move car, and it's just slicing out a piece of footage. And I think you barely notice, and I think it helps it with it and stuff like that. Finally, the final issue I had is to do with the ending of the film. Originally, I was going to cut 2 credits or something like that, and everybody worked out the ending of the film. I realized credits would have looked kind of dumb because I play every role. I've done writ, direct, acted, everything. Like I'm the only person in it, so I can't just write my name. So I thought I kind of I kind of spent time thinking and kind of thinking, what does this film mean and where does it come from and stuff like that. And I actually found a quote from Rosencrantz and Gilded Scene of Dead. I think I talked about this a lot in my research report, but this is a play that heavily influenced this film. It's the reason why it's called Brendan is Dead. And it's a quote about dying and stuff like that, that, you know, obviously connects to the title and the themes of the film. And I think it ends it in a more poetic, kind of interesting way. All right, so let's go into pros and cons. I will bring this back up. Pro of this week, I think I'm really good at timing and pacing myself. As I talked about last week, just to spoil the target review, the target for this week was to get it to a kind of rough cut. Gonna get it to like kind of a rough cut. I think I've exceeded that rough cut because I thought it'd be a rough cut without color grading, but I've got color grading, I've timed down. I think it really could have really done well. And that leaves me next week to really just touch it up, look at the details and really kind of nail it down and add those VFX shots. That is the goal for next week. A con is I did feel like someone lip syncing and the effects and no one could be better. The lip sync I can't really do a lot about because I don't have the time to refilm stuff like that. I think I can get away with it because the idea is it's a character. It's not meant to be perfect because the characters are naturally just singing along. So I think it works. But on the other side, the no to one effects, I did feel well, kind of weak and could have added to it. So the plan for next week, on top of the VFX shots, is to add some more to make it better and stuff like that, to add to nowhere to run, add more effects and stuff like that. So yeah, I did meet that target, and I think I exceeded that target. It was, as I talked about, meant to be a rough cut, and I managed to get a pretty good chunky cut together. So target for next week is to clean up effects, especially in the nowhere to run sequence, maybe trim down clips, kind of really make it perfect. And then obviously, as I've talked about a lot in this, is the plan is to shoot the to do your VFX shots for the Mr. Blue Sky sequence in After Effects. These are the bubbles and things like that. So I talked about my experimentation. But overall, I think it was a really solid week. Editing is obviously my specialism and something I'm really interested in doing. I like doing. It's very kind of interesting to me personally, and I think it really works. I did have some issue, I think, about timing and stuff like that, but overall I think I did really well. So I'm looking forward to next week where I will finally have the first draft of this film ready for you.